It was just after dusk when a small team of freight workers received their assignment. They were told to inspect and clear out an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a building that had been shut down for more than 4 decades. Locals called it the Lot of Silence, claiming no one who stayed there after midnight ever came out the same. The workers laughed off the stories, convincing themselves that old structures always carried rumors. Still, a heavy unease lingered as they stepped through the rusted gates. The warehouse loomed like a sleeping beast. Its broken windows reflected the fading sunlight, jagged like the teeth of a predator. The moment the crew crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped sharply, as though they had stepped into a freezer. Their breath fogged in the air, though outside it was still warm. Inside, the floor groaned beneath their boots. Crates stacked to the ceiling leaned precariously, some bursting open to reveal torn fabrics, mannequin arms, and yellowed paper labels from shipments dated 1973. The smell was suffocating, a mixture of mold, rust, and something far more metallic. As they moved deeper, one of the men noticed a dark trail along the floor. At first, he thought it was oil leaking from machinery, but when his flashlight beam caught the thick reddish smear, his heart tightened. It looked too much like blood, and the trail led further into the blackened maze of corridors. The men tried to laugh it off, telling each other it must be old paint. But then came the sound. Faint at first, like a chain dragging across the concrete floor. The echo bounced through the high ceilings, too loud, too deliberate to be a trick of the imagination. One worker froze, his eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. The others nodded, their bravado beginning to fade. Every shadow seemed alive, every corner too deep. The chain sound returned, louder this time, as though it circled them. One man swung his flashlight wildly, but the beam only revealed more crates, broken glass, and rats scattering into the darkness. Then, the trail of blood ended at a set of double doors, half open and swaying despite the still air. On the rusted metal surface, scratched deep into the paint, were words barely legible. "Do not wake them." No one dared to speak. The silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. It was then they realized the warehouse wasn't empty. The warning carved into the steel doors haunted them. Do not wake them. But curiosity is a cruel master. Against the growing fear in their chests, the crew pushed the heavy doors wider, the hinges shrieking like something alive. What they found beyond was not a storage hall, but a single chamber sealed away from time. The air inside was different. Stale, suffocating, almost wet against their skin. Their flashlights revealed walls covered in deep scratches, claw marks that no tool could have made. In the center of the room stood a wooden chair bolted to the floor. Its surface was rotted and darkened, but on the armrests were thick metal restraints, broken long ago. Something had been kept here, something that had fought violently to be free. One of the workers muttered a prayer under his breath, but it was drowned out by the sudden sound of the doors slamming shut behind them. The clang was final, like a coffin being sealed. The men rushed to pull them open again, but the iron wouldn't budge. It was as though the warehouse itself had locked them in. Then the lights began to flicker. First a quick pulse, then longer bursts of blackness that stretched into seconds. In those flashes of dark, they saw it. Something shifting across the ceiling. A shadowy figure, thin but impossibly long, crawling like an insect, clinging to the beams with limbs bent at unnatural angles. Its eyes glowed faintly, twin orbs of pale fire. When the light returned, the ceiling was empty. The men shouted, panicking, their voices echoing in the hollow chamber. One of them, the youngest, tried to steady himself by gripping the old chair in the center. But the moment his hand touched it, the air exploded with a piercing metallic shriek, like chains being yanked all at once. Then, the light cut out entirely. In the blackness came a scream, not from the walls, not from the ceiling, but from their own companion. A raw, blood-curdling howl that ended abruptly, choked into silence. The others fumbled for their flashlights, hands trembling, until finally a weak beam flickered on. The youngest worker was gone. On the floor where he had stood lay only his hard hat, cracked down the middle. From above, a single droplet of fresh blood fell, splattering against the dusty concrete. The men tilted their lights upward in horror. Something was still up there, and it was not finished. Only 2 workers remained. Their faces were pale, drenched in sweat despite the biting cold that wrapped around the chamber. Every breath came out in white clouds, every movement echoed too loudly in the silence. The warehouse no longer felt like a building. It felt like a living organism, breathing, pulsing, and watching. They clung to each other as they stumbled through a narrow hallway that had not been there before. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, lined with walls that bulged and contracted, as if something massive slept just beneath the surface. The air was thick with whispers, voices that slithered into their ears, speaking their names in tones both tender and cruel. Stay. Stay forever. The whispers sighed. One man covered his ears, muttering prayers, but the voices only grew louder inside his skull. His companion yanked his arm, dragging him forward, insisting there had to be an exit. At the end of the passage, a faint glow appeared. Daylight, leaking through a half-open door. Salvation. They broke into a desperate run, boots thundering against the trembling floor. The light grew brighter, and with it came the sound of chains clattering all around them, rising into a deafening roar. The walls closed in, the corridor shrinking, forcing them to squeeze through as if the warehouse itself tried to crush them. Finally, they burst into the open space of the main hall. Ahead stood the exit, sunlight spilling across the ground like a lifeline. The men sprinted toward it, hope flooding their chests. Freedom was only a few steps away. But then the doors slammed shut with a thunderous crash. The sunlight vanished, swallowed whole. The warehouse plunged into complete darkness. They screamed, hammering their fists against the steel, but behind them came the sound of chains. Dozens, maybe hundreds, rattling in unison. Slowly, the whispers returned, this time no longer coaxing, but commanding. Stay. With us. The last thing the men saw, in the faint flicker of their dying flashlights, were countless figures emerging from the shadows. Limbs too long, faces half-formed, eyes burning with pale fire. They rushed forward, and the screaming was drowned by the echo of chains. Days later, a new team of workers arrived at the site. They found the gates locked, the warehouse sealed tight, as though it had never been entered in decades. No trace of the men remained, only the silence and the feeling of being watched.